Before we begin tonight's story, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy peaceful journeys through the past. Your support helps us keep exploring the quiet corners of history together. Now, find a comfortable position, let your shoulders drop, and allow your breath to slow. Tonight, we're going far back, long before the world we know took shape. Back to a time before our species walked the earth. A time of forgotten landscapes and ancient cousins. Let's begin. Before the first words were ever spoken, before cities, before firelight flickered inside homes made of stone and wood, there was a time when the earth was quiet. A time before us. We begin our journey not with Homo Sapiens, but in a much older world. A world that whispered with the rustle of ancient winds across vast grasslands. A world where no wheels turned, no walls stood, and no names had yet been given. The air was cool and clean, laced with the crisp scent of wild herbs and the earthy musk of damp soil. Mist often clung to the ground in the morning, veiling the land in a pale silver hush. Forests stretched endlessly across continents, their canopies swaying like ocean waves in rhythm with the breeze. Each movement sent down a gentle rain of dry leaves and pollen. The trunks of ancient trees stood thick and gnarled, their bark rough and mossy to the touch. All around, life stirred. You might hear the chitter of insects beneath low ferns, or the distant splash of a fish breaking the surface of a river. The slow, rhythmic thudding of massive creatures, woolly mammoths, their warm breath steaming in the cold air, could be felt through the soles of your feet before you even saw them. This was the Pleistocene, a time of deep valleys, towering glacier, and cycles of ice and thaw. For nearly 2 million years, Earth swayed between freezing winters and brief, temperate summers. Snow covered vast stretches of land. Elsewhere, humid jungles steamed in the sunlight. It was a world of giants. In the north, herds of reindeer and bison stirred the icy wind with their heavy hooves. In the jungles, enormous birds took wing with the whoosh of feathers. Along riverbanks, great cats stalked silently, the pads of their paws making no sound on the soft ground. But hidden among these giants were the quieter beings. The upright ones. Our ancestors. They were smaller, often walking in silence along muddy riverbanks or crouching in the shade of trees. They moved with alertness, eyes constantly scanning, nostrils flaring to pick up the scent of predators or the promise of food. There was no language yet, no spoken words, but they had ways of knowing. They watched, and they remembered. They listened for the cracking of branches, the flutter of wings, the snort of an animal too close for comfort. Imagine the scent of wet stone after a rainstorm, the crunch of dry twigs beneath bare, calloused feet, the chill of early morning dew soaking into animal hides. Life was hard, but alive with sensation. Some of these early hominins, like Homo habilis, the handy man, lived over 2 million years ago. He was small and slender, with long arms and a curious mind. His hands could shape stone. He chipped flakes from river pebbles, making crude knives and scrapers. The sound of one stone striking another echoed across the plains, a deliberate rhythm. Click, crack, chip. These tools scraped hides clean of fur. They cracked open bones, releasing the rich, fatty marrow within. Then came Homo erectus. Taller, stronger, more enduring. He walked upright for great distances. He followed herds, tracked rivers, explored new lands. He knew fire, not just how to find it, but how to make it. The spark of a flint. The smell of smoke curling into a night sky. The warmth that pushed back the darkness. Flames danced in the hollows of caves, reflecting in ancient eyes. Fire was more than light. It was life. The hiss of resin in burning pine, the crackle of dry twigs, the glow that held back the cold and the wolves. And still, no Homo sapiens. Not yet. Elsewhere, the human family tree was branching. On an island in Indonesia, there lived tiny humans, Homo floresiensis, barely a meter tall. They hunted pygmy elephants and birds. Their tools were simple, their footprints still preserved in ancient mud. Their world smelled of salt air and rotting vegetation. The humid jungle was filled with buzzing insects and dripping leaves. Nights were filled with animal calls and the rustle of creatures in the underbrush. In the far north, in the Altai mountains of Siberia, lived another kind, the Denisovans. Mysterious, quiet, now known only by a tooth, a fingerbone, and traces of DNA in us. Imagine their world: the bite of cold wind, the crack of frozen branches beneath snow, the crunch of ice underfoot. Thick furs wrapped tightly around their bodies, smoke curling from fire pits beneath stone ledges. And there were the Neanderthals. Strong, thick-boned, their bodies built for the cold. But their minds, more like ours than we once believed. They carved tools with precision. They hunted with strategy. They buried their dead, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with red ochre, sometimes with grave goods. They painted, hands on cave walls, pigments ground from minerals. They lived in stone shelters, where the walls were damp and cool to the touch. The scent of cooked meat and drying hides filled the air. Children played with carved bone toys. The clink of flint echoed as tools were repaired beside the fire. They thrived across Europe and parts of Asia. They knew fire, language, community, and still, no Homo sapiens. But something was stirring. A new presence was forming. Quiet, subtle, not stronger, not faster, but different. Somewhere in Africa, in a golden savanna where tall grass swayed like waves and lions dozed in the heat, the first Homo sapiens stood. Their feet pressed into warm dust. Their skin glowed beneath the sun. Their eyes scanned the horizon not just for danger, but for meaning. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and wild animals. The air shimmered with heat. They were few. They were fragile. But inside them burned something new. They didn't yet know what they were. They didn't yet know what they would become. But they watched. They listened. And something in them, quiet and deep, was awakening. They were not alone. When Homo sapiens first opened their eyes beneath the African sun, they were only one thread in a much larger tapestry, a tapestry woven from many kinds of humans. Some were distant cousins, long gone by then. Others still walked the earth, living in forests, in high mountain caves, on islands lost to time. This was not just the age of one human. It was the age of many. Let us walk now among the others. High in the Rocky Mountains of Central Asia, where the air is thin and sharp and the wind whistles through narrow stone passes, lived a quiet branch of our family. They are known to us now only by fragments, a tooth, a fingerbone, faint traces in our genes. The Denisovans. Their caves were cold and dark. The stone underfoot was slick with condensation. Moss clung to the rocks. A fire might crackle softly at the center of the shelter, sending pale orange light dancing against the damp walls. The scent of wet stone mixed with charred bone. Smoke drifted upward and disappeared through unseen cracks in the rock ceiling. Denisovan hands, thick-fingered, capable, gripped tools made of flint and antler. They hunted animals in the snow, wrapped in furs stitched with bone needles. Their breath steamed in the chill, and each exhale was a soft cloud vanishing into the dark. We do not know their faces, but we carry pieces of them still. Tiny fragments of their DNA live on in the peoples of Tibet, in parts of Southeast Asia, and in indigenous Australians. They are gone, but not entirely. Far to the west, another kind of human lived among the frozen valleys and evergreen forests of Ice Age Europe. Broad-chested and powerful, with limbs built to endure bitter cold, they are perhaps our most famous cousins. The Neanderthals. Their world was filled with sound. The crunch of snow under heavy feet. The rhythmic slap of animal hides stretched and scraped over bone frames. The howls of wolves in the distance, answered by the sharp whistle of a stone-tipped spear cutting through the air. Their caves were not empty. There were fires, always fires. Flickering warmth, the steady pop of resin in burning wood, the gentle hiss as moisture boiled away. The air inside smelled of smoke, cooked meat, sweat, and tanned leather. Children played near the hearth, stacking small rocks, chewing on beads made of ivory. Elders sat close to the fire, flint in hand, slowly chipping at a new blade. The floor was packed with fur. If you knelt, you would feel its softness beneath your fingers, the rougher underlayer of deer, the silky touch of hair pelts. And they were not brutes. They sang, perhaps only in simple tones. But they had rhythm, repetition. They may have clapped, hummed, tapped stones together. They painted, too. Red and black symbols on cave walls, handprints left behind in ochre, the negative of a palm that once touched cool stone. Those hands, still visible today, like ghosts. They buried their dead. Carefully. Sometimes with antlers, tools, or wildflowers. Not just to protect the body, but perhaps, we think now, to mourn. They had minds like ours. Perhaps gentler than we imagined. They lived in close-knit groups, cared for the injured, nursed the elderly. They endured. For hundreds of thousands of years. But there were others still. Much farther south, in a rainforest thick with vines and humidity, lived one of the most mysterious of all. Homo floresiensis. They were tiny, barely more than a meter tall. You might think of them as fragile, but they were not. They were hunters, tool makers, survivors. Their home, on the island of Flores in Indonesia, was a world of strange sounds and heavy, damp air. Insects buzzed constantly. The leaves of giant ferns dripped water onto the soft earth. Birds screeched high in the canopy. The scent of ripe fruit mixed with the odor of decay, wet bark, and jungle moss. Their shelters were small, tucked beneath overhangs or in shallow caves. The firelight cast long shadows against the slick stone, and the smoke stung their eyes. They hunted pygmy elephants and rodents, stalking through the thick brush barefoot, each footfall cushioned by layers of moist leaves and tangled roots. Their tools were crude, but sharp. Stone flakes chipped from local rock. Simple, effective, deadly. They lived on their island for tens of thousands of years. And then, they disappeared. And there was more still. On another island, Luzon, in the Philippines, scientists discovered the remains of yet another human cousin. Homo luzonensis. Small in stature. Delicate teeth. Strange limb bones, different from all the others. We know little of their world. Only that they were there. Among the birdsong and volcanic soil. Among the hot winds and thick clouds. For every cousin we've found, there may be others lost to time. Whole branches of the human family tree that vanished without a trace. Imagine, for a moment, the world as it was then. A planet shared by many humans. Each species unaware that it would not be the last. Their sounds were everywhere. the scrape of stone, the crack of fire, the quiet murmur of voices in many tongues, now all lost. Their worlds were textured and alive. Rough bark underhand, the soft give of fur-wrapped shoes on icy ground, the sting of wind, the burn of smoke, the gentle brush of ferns against bare legs. Their food smelled of roasted meat, bitter roots, boiled grasses. They gathered berries and tubers, stored them in woven baskets, pressed them into pastes. And they loved. They cared. They watched the stars. Just like us. But in time, one by one, the others would fade. Some would vanish with changing climates. Others would merge with us, their blood carried forward in our veins. The age of many would end, and the age of one would begin. But not yet. For now, they walked together, in parallel, across forests and rivers, mountains and valleys, each shaped by their own gifts, their own challenges, each thinking they were alone, yet never truly separate. Their voices echo still, faint and distant, in our bones, in our breath, in our dreams. They were born beneath the African sun, long before kings, before pyramids, before stories were written in stone or sung across firelight. The first Homo sapiens emerged quietly, like dawn slipping gently over the edge of a horizon. There were no trumpets, no flags, only the soft stir of wind over golden grasses, the crackle of dry twigs under bare feet, the distant rumble of hooves across a plain where lions slept beneath acacia trees. They were few at first, scattered across the open savannas and forest edges of eastern Africa, their footprints left in dry riverbeds that vanished with the season, their lives shaped by the rhythm of the land. Their skin was dark and warm-toned, built for the sun. Their bodies lean and strong, able to run for hours, slow, steady, persistent. Their feet were wide and sturdy, toes splayed to grip the shifting soil beneath them. Their hands were dexterous, the palms calloused from stone and bark. If you could see them, those first Homo sapiens, you would recognize them. They would look like us. Not vaguely, not distantly, but unmistakably human. Their eyes, intelligent and alert. Their posture upright. Their mouths capable of speech, though words were still forming. They lived by following the land, by tracking the sky, by reading the wind. They knew the taste of wild tubers dug from the earth, the sting of bitter leaves chewed for medicine, the scent of a spring rain carried on the breeze before a storm arrived. They hunted with wooden spears hardened in fire. They gathered honey from hidden hives, reaching into tree hollows as bees buzzed angrily around them. They cracked open bones to suck the rich marrow inside, the taste savory and warm on their tongues. And they were beginning to remember. They lived in small bands, maybe 20, 30, sometimes 50. Families bound not just by blood, but by stories. Stories told with gestures, with markings in dirt, with rhythm in breath. At night, they huddled around small fires. The air smelled of smoke and ash, of sweat and animal fat. Children slept against their mothers, wrapped in hides that still carried the scent of fur and dust. Above them, the stars turned slowly in the sky, and someone, watching the constellations, began to wonder. Not just where the prey had gone, not just what made the thunder roll, but why. Why the stars moved, why the sun disappeared, why the heart beat fast when the lion roared. A different kind of thought had begun to stir. Not just survival, but reflection. And with reflection came invention. They carved new kinds of tools, thin, sharp blades from obsidian that sliced clean and fast. They attached stone points to wooden shafts with resin and sinew. They built traps, dug pits, learned how to herd and corral. The sounds of tool-making echoed through their camps. The tap-tap of hammerstones. The hiss of fire as damp wood caught flame. The rustle of woven grass mats laid across sleeping shelters. They made pigments from ochre, charcoal, and clay. Red and black smeared across stone or pressed between fingers. They painted their faces before the hunt. They decorated their tools. They marked the places they slept. Their culture was beginning to take shape. And language. It bloomed slowly, like light creeping into a cave. At first, it may have been little more than sound and gesture. A grunt to warn. A whistle to call. A hum to soothe a frightened child. But over time, it grew. They named things. They called out to one another. They shared what they knew, not only through action, but through words. Language wrapped itself around memory, passed from mouth to mouth like fire passed from torch to torch. It meant a mother could teach her child without pointing. A hunter could describe what lay beyond the hill. A dream could become a story, and the story could live longer than the dreamer. The voice became the first tool of memory, and memory became power. But life was not easy. The sun was fierce. The dry seasons long. Predators lurked in tall grass, waiting with patient breath. They listened for danger with every step. The snapping of a twig, the hush of wings, the thud of hooves. They learned the texture of the world through their senses. How to feel the tension in the air before a storm. How to smell the difference between fresh dung and old tracks. How to run toward water by following the cries of birds. They had no maps, no clocks, no written names, but they knew the land. They followed it not as wanderers, but as readers of its language, etched in footprints, shaded in the curling of leaves, spoken in the silence between bird calls. And they dreamed. The first Homo sapiens likely dreamed as we do. They saw visions behind closed eyes. They felt fear and awe and wonder, even when no danger was present. What did they dream? Of the hunt? Of the stars? Of faces that had gone too soon? Perhaps they saw spirits in the trees, or heard the voices of ancestors in the howl of wind over the plains. Perhaps they danced around the fire, not only to stay warm, but to tell the sky that they were alive. And perhaps they began to ask what came after death. What lay beyond the mountain? What gave the fire its breath? They were like us. And yet, they were also something more. Because they were first. The first to imagine a world that could be changed. The first to wonder what was possible. The first to speak to the unseen. They didn't know what they were becoming, but something in their minds was shifting. Softly, steadily. The future was already echoing in their footsteps. As the seasons turned, they would move outward, following rivers, crossing valleys, pushing into lands unknown. They didn't know they were about to encounter the others, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the cousins who had lived in those places for hundreds of thousands of years. But the meeting was coming, and it would change everything. The sun rises slowly over the Great Rift Valley. A golden beam spills across the cracked earth, warming stones still slick with night dew. Shadows stretch long over the grasslands. The world is waking. In the distance, you can hear it. A soft rustle of dry leaves. The gentle tapping of bare feet on dust. The low murmur of human voices, blending with the birdsong. This is the world of early Homo sapiens. Their home. Their cradle. They live close to the earth. Their shelters are simple, curved branches lashed with sinew, covered in woven grasses or the skins of hunted animals. The scent of smoke clings to everything, to the hides, to the hair, to the air itself. Ash floats in the breeze, rising from the fire pit where embers still glow from the night before. A young woman squats beside the coals. She stirs ashes with a stick, carefully feeding the fire with dry twigs. The wood snaps and hisses, the flames licking upward, crackling softly. The heat brings comfort. It keeps predators away. It softens roots and meat. She adds a bundle of herbs to the pot, wild garlic, bitter greens, something that smells faintly of mint. Steam rises in gentle clouds, curling into the morning sky. It smells of earth and spice, of smoke and nourishment. A nearby child rubs sleep from their eyes, wrapped in a cloak of rabbit fur. The world is slow, but alive. The people move in rhythm with the land. In the Rift Valley, life is both harsh and generous. Water pools in long, shallow lakes. Fish flash silver just below the surface. Tall grasses sway in the wind, whispering secrets in a language older than words. Their hands are busy, always working. One man sharpens a spear with a stone tool, testing the tip with his thumb. Another kneels by a patch of clay, molding it into a small vessel, his fingers pressing ridges into the wet surface. The smell of wet earth rises with every touch. Farther out, two women bend over low bush, plucking berries with stained fingers. Their nails are cracked from digging. Their hands smell faintly of sweet fruit and soil. They hum softly, a tune with no name, but one known to their people. Tools are everywhere, not just scattered, but made with care. Scrapers, blades, awls, points, each shaped with thought and purpose. You can hear the soft chip of stone on stone as someone knaps obsidian, each flake falling to the ground with a faint metallic tinkle. The edge is sharp, razor-thin. It glints in the sun, black and shining like a crow's wing. The tools are wrapped in sinew, reinforced with resin, set into wooden shafts cured over flame. These are not simple instruments. They are memory, passed down through hands, generation to generation. Their world is rich in texture. The smooth coolness of river stone. The grit of dried mud clinging to feet. The sticky drag of tree sap on fingertips. Children play near the water, their laughter soft, their feet kicking up clouds of dust as they run. They chase each other with sticks, leap over logs, toss handfuls of grass into the wind. They learn by doing, by watching, by failing, and trying again. The older ones teach without words. They show. They guide. They trust that knowledge will take root in silence. Hunting is done in groups. A hunt is more than a task, it is a ritual. Spears are prepared. Bodies are painted. Faces are marked with streaks of red ochre. They move silently across the grassland, the wind at their backs. The air is dry and still, and the smell of the herd, thick, musky, damp, carries on the breeze. There is no shouting, only gestures. Eyes meet, heads nod, fingers signal. Then, movement. The chase begins with a pounding of feet, the rush of blood, the sound of breath pushed hard through lungs. When the kill is made, they gather around the fallen beast. There is no waste. Meat is carved. Bones are cracked for marrow. Organs are cooked. Fur is cleaned and dried. Sinew is saved for tools and thread. The kill is sacred. The animal is respected. They speak to it softly as they work, not out of pity, but reverence. In the evenings, stories begin. Not with words, but with motion. A man gestures with his hands, shaping the air with invisible animals. A woman imitates the dance of a bird, her fingers fluttering, her arms arcing wide. They sit around the fire. The night is warm, but the fire gives comfort. It snaps and pops, throwing golden light on their faces. The shadows flicker on the cave walls, tall and wild. Someone begins to sing, not a song with verses, but a rhythm, a call, a chant that rises and falls like breath. Others join. Feet begin to tap. Bodies sway. Drums made from stretched hide pulse with heartbeat rhythms. You can feel the vibration in the ground. You can smell the fire. You can hear the wind curl around the shelter like an old friend. They mark the passage of time not with calendars, but with the sky. The phases of the moon. The angle of shadows. The flowering of certain plants. The return of birds. And they remember. They remember where the roots grow thick. Where the water lasts longest in dry months. Where the lions hunt in the dark. They pass this memory forward, not with books, but with bodies, with gestures, with songs, with silent lessons taught through touch and repetition. This life is not easy. Infections spread, snakes bite, babies die, and still they endure, because they adapt, they notice. They respond. Where other humans are strong, Homo sapiens are subtle. They learn not just to survive, but to understand, to shape their world in small ways, to ask questions of it, to look at the stars and feel wonder. In the Rift Valley, the roots of who we are begin to take hold. The senses are sharp, the memory long, the imagination stirring. They do not yet know what lies beyond the horizon, but they are already looking, already dreaming, and the dream is about to spread. It began with a breath, a sound, a shared glance between two people who understood each other, without needing to point. Long before alphabets, long before ink met parchment or syllables were etched into clay, there was language. Not yet in the form we know, but something older, something growing. In the flickering firelight of ancient evenings, Homo sapiens sat close together, knees drawn to chests, the warm smell of cooked meat thick in the air. Embers glowed like tiny stars. The wind whispered through the grasses just beyond the camp. And somewhere, deep in the throat of one human, a sound emerged. Not a cry of alarm, not a grunt of exertion, but something new, a sound to carry meaning. It might have started small, a gesture paired with a hum, a rhythm repeated to mark a path, a short, sharp syllable meant to call someone near. But slowly, patiently, these sounds grew roots. They were remembered, echoed, shared. Around the fire, the people began to speak, not in full sentences yet, but in syllables paired with motion. A hand sweeping across the sky, a whisper that meant storm, a tapping rhythm for come quickly. They used breath as a tool, their lungs filled with cool air that smelled of ash and morning dew. Their throats formed vibrations. Tongues and lips shaped the edges. And so, language began. This was the spark that separated Homo sapiens from all others. The Neanderthals had sound. They likely had some words. Perhaps they could name things. But sapiens? They could weave thoughts. They could shape past and future. They could tell a story not just of what is, but of what might be. Language was not just for naming. It became a bridge between one mind and another, between one generation and the next. It stitched time together, and with it came the power to remember and to imagine. Their words were born from the world around them. The hiss of snakes in dry grass, the click of flint on stone, the low growl of predators in the night, all gave shape to their vocal landscape. They mimicked the sounds of birds, the cry of babies, the rumble of thunder. And then, they made sounds that were their own. Sounds with no echo in nature, sounds invented to carry thought. And the more they spoke, the more they understood. Not just the world, but each other. In a quiet clearing at dusk, a young woman tells her companion where the berries grow thickest this season. Not with gestures alone, but with breath, sound, tone. She points once, but her voice carries the rest. It's a soft tone, confident, familiar, and he nods. He understands. Language has formed, not written, not perfect, but living. Nearby, a child listens, absorbing it all. The rise and fall of sound, the pause before certain words, the subtle shift in meaning that comes with a lifted eyebrow or tilted head. Children learn quickly, their ears tuned to the voices around them, to the cadence of instruction, to the lullaby of evening songs, to the warning tones of danger and the low hum of affection. And now, memory could stretch farther, beyond what the eye had seen. A story could carry the shape of a hunt, could describe the arc of a river far away, could tell of a creature no one living had ever seen, but all remembered. Language made thought portable. It gave the mind tools to build inside the silence. It also brought comfort. Whispers in the dark when the wind moaned across the plains. Words to soothe a crying infant. Soft voices rising with the crackle of fire. "I am here," the voice could say. "We are together." And that was enough. With speech came myth, the first kindling of belief. They spoke of the moon, how it vanished and returned. They whispered about the stars, how they moved like hunters through the sky. They wondered aloud about death, about what happened to the body, to the breath. And their stories, told again and again, gave shape to mystery. They began to name not only things, but ideas. Hunger, fear, joy, regret. And once you can name a feeling, you can share it. You can build with it. You can heal with it. Even the land began to speak, not through words of its own, but through the voices of those who walked it. That mountain, it has a name. That river, it tells a story. That hollow tree where the owls live, it is sacred. In naming the land, they made it home. They mapped it with memory, with shared meaning. Not on paper, but in minds and mouths and songs. And now, the group became more than just a cluster of bodies. It became a community, held together by sound, by story, by the quiet hum of mutual understanding. They passed this down with care. Around the fire, elders told the young ones where to find the best stones, how to follow the herds, how to treat a wound with crushed leaves and ash, how to survive the dry season. Each story passed with voice. Each detail carried in the breath between syllables. No books, no scrolls, only air, only memory. And yet, these words would last longer than bone. They would live in minds and hearts for generations. They sang, too, not just for joy, but for rhythm, to time the pounding of roots into flower, to guide the pace of walking, to honor the spirits of the hunt. Their songs rose like smoke, mingling with the clouds above. Simple at first, drumming palms on the earth, clapping hands, humming through closed lips. But gradually, they added notes, repeating sounds, layered chants. Sound became structure. Structure became beauty. And language became art. This was the quiet revolution. The change no fossil can show, but one that would ripple across every generation to come. It didn't happen all at once, but step by step, breath by breath, woord by woord. The spark of language became the fire of thought, and in its glow, Homo sapiens began to shape not only tools, but meaning itself. The warmth did not last. Seasons shifted, winds grew colder, and the world began to change. It started with a chill in the evening air, a whisper of frost along the edges of leaves. The rivers ran slower, edged with creeping ice. The sky, once blue and wide, turned pale and grey for longer stretches. Snowflakes began to fall where there had never been snow before. The world was entering an ice age, and Homo sapiens, still young, still few, would have to face it. Across the African highlands, the cold crept slowly. Winds rushed through the tall grasses, whistling like ghosts. Clouds gathered thick and low, bringing rain for weeks at a time. Pools of water that once teemed with fish dried into cracked clay beds. Fruit-bearing trees bore less. Animals wandered farther to graze. The air smelled of wet bark, damp fur, and smoke that never quite cleared. Ash clung to the skin. Mildew spread across sleeping mats. But the people did not panic. They adapted. They stitched their clothing tighter, wrapped themselves in furs with a soft underlayer facing inward. They dug deeper fire pits. They dried food on woven racks above the flames. Meat, roots, herbs, all preserved in smoke and memory. A new kind of resilience was forming. And still, they moved. Northward, into new lands, into forests where ice clung to every branch, across mountain passes glazed in frost. Their feet crunched over frozen earth. Each breath left a pale cloud in the air. Their noses stung from the cold, and the inside of their hides grew slick with sweat that turned to chill. Frost formed on eyebrows, and hands stiffened around spears. But they pressed on, because they knew how to observe, how to wait, how to listen. The farther north they went, the more they encountered the ice. It blanketed entire landscapes. Glacier moved like slow beasts across the valleys, silent but unstoppable. The sun was dimmer, the days shorter. The wind carried a hollow tone, like it had passed through bone. They found new ways to live. Snow was melted in stone bowls set near the fire. Bones were carved into needles to stitch hides more tightly. Fat was prized, used not just for food, but for lamps that burned long into the night. Their shelters changed. Sometimes built against the wind, half dug into the ground. Walls lined with fur, the floor packed with moss and earth. A fire in the center, its warmth radiating outward in soft waves. The scent inside was heavy, meat, smoke, sweat, and the faint, sweet rot of stored roots. Outside, the wind howled like a wild animal. But inside, the people sang. They did not just survive the cold. They learned to use it. Tracks in snow became easier to read. Animal migrations followed predictable routes. Water frozen in the morning could be carried in blocks, then melted later for drinking. They began to shape the land around them, not with tools alone, but with understanding. They placed shelters to catch the most sunlight. They hunted in groups that moved like waves, coordinated, silent, patient. They shared food equally, for survival meant cooperation. A single missed meal could mean the end. But together, they endured. And still, the ice came closer. It carved the world into new forms. Valleys gouged deep. Mountains dusted in white. Plains hardened into tundra. But amid the cold, there was beauty. Ice crystals hung like glass from tree branches. The sun, low on the horizon, turned the snow golden in the evenings. The quiet, so vast, so complete, wrapped the people in a stillness deeper than sleep. Footsteps became the loudest sound. A laugh echoed for miles. The crack of a branch could stop the heart. And the sudden silence before a storm was its own kind of voice. They began to create stories about the cold. They said the wind was alive, that it had moods, that it carried messages. They gave names to glacier and whispered to the stars at night, not out of superstition, but out of the human need to belong, even in a land that tried to push them out. They marked their passage in the snow with cairns, small stacks of stone. They painted red ochre on the rocks beneath overhangs. And when they found the bones of other humans, sometimes older species, sometimes their own, they buried them beneath layers of earth, fur, and stone. They did not abandon their dead to the cold. They gave them warmth, even in death. The Ice Age was not constant. It came in pulses. Cold ages. Warm interludes. Then cold again. But each cycle tested them. And each time, they grew wiser. They learned to store food across seasons. To use bone and antler as more than just tools, but as craft. They carved handles with care, smoothed points with fire and ash. They decorated with patterns, spirals, lines, crosses. Even as the world became harder, they made it beautiful. They passed down knowledge like fire, one mind to the next, one winter at a time. They sang to their children not just for comfort, but to help them remember which berries to avoid, how to mend a tear in the hide, where the snow is thinnest, and why that matters. The songs were practical, but also full of wonder, because even in the cold, they dreamed. They dreamed of warmer places, of lands without snow, of rivers that did not freeze, of stars that burned closer. They carried those dreams with them, wrapped in fur, tucked into stories, whispered through the crackling of fire. And someday, they would follow those dreams, beyond the ice, beyond the familiar. But for now, the cold was king. The world was carved in frost. And yet, the spark of humanity burned on. It crackled in every word shared, every fire lit, every track read in the snow, every child born into a world that demanded everything, and gave only survival in return. Still, they stayed. Still, they endured. Still, they waited. Because soon, they would meet the others. And the world would change. They had been alone for so long, walking across hills and valleys, crossing rivers, climbing over mountains, settling by lakes. They thought they were the only ones. But then, they saw them. Not shadows, not animals, but others, standing upright, watching back, with human eyes. The first encounters between Homo sapiens and their ancient cousins were likely not grand or dramatic. They were cautious, quiet, charged with a kind of awe. It may have happened near a riverbank, water lapping softly against smooth stones, the air thick with the scent of wet reeds and distant fire smoke, birds chattering overhead. A man steps forward to collect water, his hands cupped beneath the surface. And across the bank, another figure does the same, broad-shouldered, heavy-browed, eyes watching. A Neanderthal. The moment hangs. Neither speaks, but both know. There is recognition, not just of difference, but of similarity. The tilt of the head, the rhythm of breath, the posture of curiosity. They stand, facing one another, the river between them, a silent mirror. In some places, the encounters turned into avoidance. One group keeping to the forests, the other to the highlands. Not from fear, necessarily, but from uncertainty. But in other places, contact deepened. Tentative steps became shared trails, shared water, shared fire. They traded things. A shell for a blade, a woven net for a polished bone pendant. The items exchanged carried not just utility, but meaning. Imagine it. The first moment when one hand reaches out to give, and another accepts. The air around such meetings would be thick with tension. The smell of sweat, of leather and smoke, of crushed leaves underfoot, the sharp scent of freshly struck flint. No common language. But gestures worked. So did tone. So did time. They learned one another, not through words, but through patience. And over time, something even deeper happened. They didn't just meet. They mingled. They touched. They stayed. A young woman from one group finds warmth in another's fire. A child is born with features of both. Genes blending like two rivers joining. The proof is still in us. In our blood. In our bones. Neanderthal DNA lingers in modern humans, especially those from Europe and Asia. Their legacy is not lost. It lives on. Inside us. But not every meeting was peaceful. The hunt was sacred. Territory meant survival. And sometimes, a group would return to a foraging site, to find it already picked clean. Footprints in the mud, fire remnants where none should be, and tensions would rise. The scent of ash on the wind, the sound of distant shouting, spears gripped tighter, children drawn closer. We do not know how many fights broke out. But we know there was competition, and where food was scarce, violence sometimes followed. Still, more often than war, there was wonder. Imagine the exchange of knowledge. One group showing how to trap fish beneath a frozen stream, the other revealing how to carve a spear that flies straighter in the wind. They observed each other, copied each other, improved together. Archaeologists have found Neanderthal tools that look suddenly more complex, just after Homo sapiens arrived. And Homo sapiens, too, began to decorate with red ochre in regions where Neanderthals once lived. The ideas were shared, passed like fire. And it wasn't only the Neanderthals. Farther east, in the cold mountains of Siberia, others waited in silence. The Denisovans. Homo sapiens entered their lands slowly, snow crunching beneath leather-wrapped feet, ice cracking under pressure, frost clinging to every surface. They found bones, caves, and sometimes the people themselves. We know even less about how Sapiens and Denisovans met, but we know that they did, because their genes, too, live on. In the people of Southeast Asia, in indigenous Australians, in the high-altitude resilience of Tibetan villagers. The blood of mountain dwellers carries ancient whispers. Denisovan whispers. These encounters were not isolated. They happened again and again. In Europe, in Asia, perhaps even farther still. And each time, the human story changed. Not a conquest, not a replacement, but a merging, a reshaping, a learning. But something about Homo sapiens made them different. Their tools were lighter, more refined, their shelters more adaptable, their group structures more flexible, and their words, their stories, let them hold on to ideas across generations. They did not just see, they shared. And what they shared could be remembered. Perhaps the others watched them, curious. Perhaps they marveled at the speed of their movements, the sounds of their laughter, the strange symbols they etched into bone and wood. Maybe they wondered what it all meant. Maybe they felt something shifting, just as we do now, when we sense the winds of change. For a time, the world held many kinds of humans. Different faces, different voices, all shaped by the same sun, the same storms, the same stars. But the balance was fragile. And soon, the others would begin to disappear. Not all at once. Not everywhere. But gradually, quietly, like a flame burning low. Until the only ones left were us. The world was wide, and the horizon, always just out of reach, called to them. The winds of the Rift Valley, once warm and familiar, began to shift. The rains came later. The rivers thinned. The herds moved farther with each season. And so, they followed. Homo sapiens moved. Not all at once. Not as armies or caravans, but as families, as small groups, walking quietly through tall grasses, their footsteps pressing lightly into soft earth still damp with morning dew. The air was thick with the scent of sun-warmed dust and blooming acacia. Bees buzzed lazily around thorny flowers. Birds rose in sudden flocks from trees, their wings rustling like paper in wind. They walked by instinct, following water, following game, following something they couldn't name. Perhaps it was hunger, perhaps it was hope, perhaps it was the simple pull of the unknown. They moved along river valleys that wound like threads through the continent. They crossed grassy plains, wide and golden, where shadows stretched long in the afternoon sun. They forded streams with careful steps, cool water brushing against their legs, carrying the scent of algae and mud. When the sky darkened, they rested, under stars that shimmered like embers scattered across the heavens. They slept curled beneath hide blankets, their dreams full of firelight and mammoth shapes. The nights were cold. The wind carried the howl of hyenas. But the people sang quietly as they drifted into sleep. Soft chants passed down from their elders, rhythms shaped to soothe and remember. As they moved farther north and east, the terrain changed. Grass gave way to dry scrub. The soil grew coarse beneath their feet. New birds cried from rocky cliffs. The scent of the air changed. Less green, more dust, more salt. They followed the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa, crossing into lands no human had yet touched. Some may have built simple rafts, bundles of reeds lashed with sinew, to paddle along the coastlines, salt spray stinging their eyes. Others may have walked across exposed land bridges, their path lit by a pale moon. However they crossed, they left Africa behind, and the world opened to them. They entered the Arabian Peninsula. There, heat shimmered above sand. Lizards darted between stones. The sun beat down without mercy. But still, they adapted. They rose early, traveling before the heat reached its peak. They carried water in carved gourds. They shaded their heads with hides. They learned the signs of hidden springs. A patch of green among rock. The humming of bees. The cool scent of moisture buried beneath cracked earth. Farther east, they reached the coasts of India, where the air smelled of salt and mango, and monsoon winds swept through in thick, wet sheets. Here, the forests sang. Monkeys shrieked from treetops. Crickets chirped like rainfall. And the people listened. They made new tools from bamboo and obsidian. They learned to fish with spears and woven traps. The sea gave them more than food. It gave rhythm. It taught them to watch the tides, to read the sky, to feel the pull of time itself. They did not stop. Over generations, centuries, they moved through the lush river valleys of Southeast Asia, where frogs croaked in the evening, and vines twisted like snakes around ancient trees, through dense jungles where light dappled the forest floor, and the scent of damp soil and blooming orchids filled the air. They moved south, to lands where volcanoes smoked in the distance, and islands floated on blue seas like emeralds. They reached Indonesia, where they met the descendants of Homo floresiensis, the tiny island people who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. There may have been awe, there may have been confusion, but again, there was meeting, and in time, mingling. The human story folded in new pages. Others moved north, into the cold, forested steppes of Central Asia. Pine trees towered overhead. The ground was soft with needles and moss. Snow came earlier each year. Here, the world was quiet. A different kind of silence. Not empty, but deep. You could hear the creak of branches in the wind, the distant snap of frozen river ice, the breath of animals curled in caves. They met the Denisovans here, and once again, they stayed. Shared warmth, shared genes, shared time. Still others continued west, into what is now the Middle East, and then into Europe. Cold, vast, beautiful. There they met the Neanderthals in full. Fires burned in stone shelters. Snow crunched beneath heavy boots. Meat smoked above coals. And again, the story deepened. Not always peacefully, but undeniably. Their blood became ours. Their ideas lingered. Their hands once held the same stone we now cradle in museums. And still, they moved. Not because they were lost, but because they were alive. To move was to learn, to grow, to survive. They followed the rhythms of nature, the seasons, the migrations, the hunger that tugged at their bellies and dreams. They left handprints on cave walls in France. They painted animals that no longer roam the earth. They mapped stars on ceilings of stone, and marked time with notches on bone. They carried language, memory, culture, in their feet, in their fire, In the breath they passed to children beneath mammoth-hide tents. The migration never truly ended. It still echoes. In the way we look to the horizon. In the way we wonder what lies beyond. They walked. They adapted. They survived. Not as conquerors, but as listeners, observers, rememberers. They followed the earth like a story, and step by step, they became the authors of it. They had followed the rivers north, across plains and mountains, through forests where the light filtered down like smoke through tall trees. They had crossed deserts and coastlines, islands and glacier. And now, they stood at the threshold of a continent unlike any they had known. Europe. Cold. Vast. And already occupied. The wind here was sharper. It carried the bite of ice. It sang through bare branches in tones low and hollow, like flutes made of bone. The sky was pale more often than blue. Clouds drifted slow and heavy. Snow fell in soft silence, blanketing everything with stillness. Their feet pressed into new ground, hard, frozen soil. The scent of pine needles and smoke hung in the air. Their hands wrapped tighter in furs. Their fires burned longer. Their movements grew slower, more deliberate. Europe was not empty. The Neanderthals were here, and had been for a long, long time. They ruled the land in quiet strength. Their shelters were carved into cliffs and caves. Their tools were well made, thick and sturdy. They hunted reindeer and bison, tracked mammoths through snow, and built lives beneath the crests of ancient hills. Their fires burned low and steady. The walls of their homes were painted, hands, animals, signs. Their children learned from watching, from mimicking. Their elders passed on knowledge through action and presence. They were not us, but they were human. When Homo Sapiens arrived, they came cautiously. Their groups were small. They followed the valleys, kept to the edges of forests, listened for sounds carried on the wind, the crack of a branch, the distant cry of a child, the low hum of a flute echoing inside a cave. Signs of the others, signs of home already claimed. And still, they stayed. They found places between. Small valleys, open plains, forests untouched. They built shelters with stone bases and wood walls, covered in hides that flapped in the wind like sails. They dug fire pits deep, lined with ash and bone. They warmed stones to tuck beneath blankets of fur. Inside, it smelled of meat and moss. Outside, the snow fell in long quiet waves, every flake a silent drumbeat, every morning a ritual of survival. There were times when they crossed paths with Neanderthals, perhaps near a kill site, where both had tracked the same herd, perhaps at a river crossing, where both needed the water. They watched each other carefully. No sudden movements. No raised weapons. Just breath. Steam rising from mouths. Eyes narrowing. Hands open. Cautious. But not cruel. And sometimes, they stayed. Together. Bones tell us this. The bones of children with mixed features. Strong brows. Slender jaws. Genetic echoes of both worlds. Flesh born from shared firelight. This was not a war. It was a meeting. A mingling. Though not without tension. Neanderthals were better suited to the cold. Their bodies stockier, more insulated. They had the strength to bring down larger prey. But Homo sapiens had something else. a flexibility, a lightness, an edge. Their tools were finer. Blades chipped from flint so thin they could slice through hide like bone through snow. They used bone and antler to fashion hooks, barbed spears, even musical instruments. Their shelters could be taken apart and rebuilt. Their language, more layered, more agile. Their art, more symbolic. They carried ideas from one place to another like embers kept alive in the mind. They also lived in larger groups, more complex hierarchies, stronger social bonds. Their camps hummed with sound, children laughing, women weaving, men shaping stone. Stories passed in whispers. Songs hummed while preparing meat. Rhythms tapped on wood as they waited for rain to stop. They painted on cave walls. Not just animals, but entire hunts. Movement, emotion, memory. Their thoughts had begun to reach beyond the now, beyond the cold, beyond the edge of the forest. And slowly, the Neanderthals faded. Why? We cannot say for sure. Perhaps they were outnumbered. Perhaps they were absorbed. Perhaps they simply gave way. They stopped appearing in the archaeological record. Their tools vanished. Their homes grew cold. Their bones no longer mixed with ash in the cave floors. But their voices remained. In the DNA of children born long after. In the shape of cheekbones and muscle fibers. In our immune systems. In our dreams. Europe belonged to Homo Sapiens now. But not in conquest. In continuity. They left their own marks. The curved lines of mammoths drawn in charcoal. The prints of bare feet pressed into mud that hardened into stone. The beads carved from ivory. Painted red. Worn on string around a neck long turned to dust. They brought with them fire. And song, and a sense that something larger connected it all. They were no longer just survivors. They were storytellers, builders, carriers of memory. Europe, with all its ice and silence, became a new canvas. And on it, they painted not just animals, but themselves. They were not the strongest. Not the tallest, not even the most physically suited to the harsh, frozen world they now inhabited. But Homo sapiens had something else. A quiet, invisible power. A spark. Not in the muscle, but in the mind. This was the edge. The difference. The silent revolution that set them apart. The brain of a Homo sapiens was not dramatically larger than that of a Neanderthal. In fact, the Neanderthals had slightly bigger skulls on average. But size is not everything. It was the wiring that mattered. The connections. The way ideas moved inside their minds. Faster, more fluid, more layered. They could think symbolically. They could imagine what wasn't there. They could dream. And from that dream came change. In a dimly lit shelter at the edge of a forest, a woman scratches lines into a piece of bone. Not random scratches, but marks, patterns, a record. Perhaps the phases of the moon. Perhaps the days since the last rain. Perhaps the count of a pregnancy or the cycle of the herd. She runs her thumb over the ridges. They are shallow, but they mean something. No other species had done this. Elsewhere, a man chips away at flint. Not just to make a tool, but to make a better one. He studies the angle of the stone. He knows how it breaks, how it flakes. He doesn't just repeat a pattern. He innovates. With a final tap, the blade falls free, thin, deadly, beautiful. He holds it up to the light, watching the way it glints like ice. In his mind, he's already seeing the next tool, and the one after that. What separated Homo sapiens from their cousins was not only the ability to survive, but the ability to think beyond the immediate, to remember the past, to plan for the future, to imagine what might be. They began to tell stories not just about the hunt, but about the stars, about the spirits of animals, about the origins of fire and the meaning of death. Their minds could hold entire worlds that didn't exist, and that changed everything. A child hears a story by the fire, one of a bird that steals the sun, or a wolf that guards the river. She clutches a carved figurine in her hands. Its surface is smooth from many fingers, its form familiar. A bird, a bear, a god. She sees it not just as an object, but as something more, a symbol, a memory, a piece of something larger. This is abstraction. This is belief. They drew on walls, not just to pass time, not just to decorate, but to say, I saw this. I was here. This matters. In a cave in what is now France, someone mixed ochre with animal fat, dipped fingers into the paste, and pressed their hand against cold stone, then pulled away, leaving only the outline, a ghost of touch, a human print that would last 30,000 years. It wasn't just art. It was intention. It was memory, made visible. They developed rituals, not just burials, but ceremonies, graves filled with beads, flowers, red pigment, bodies curled in fetal position, as if returned to the womb of the earth. They whispered over the dead, sang to them, marked the spot, came back to remember. The past mattered now. So did the unseen, and their minds were not alone. They shared them, through language, through song, through gesture and expression. They passed down more than survival strategies. They passed down identity. They told stories of where they had come from, of what the stars meant, of what dreams might reveal. They built culture. And with culture came strength. The cognitive edge also shaped how they worked together. Homo sapiens organized in complex social groups. They tracked who owed favors, who had shared food, who could be trusted, who needed help. They played. They joked. They teased. They comforted. They argued and forgave. Their relationships were layered, built on emotion and memory, and that made their groups stronger, more flexible, more resilient, more human. In a harsh winter, they pooled resources. In a flood, they moved together. In a moment of danger, they didn't just fight. They warned. They strategized. They planned. When a child was born, it wasn't just one mother who cared. It was the group, the village, the community. They were not just surviving. They were investing in each other and in the future. Even their tools reflected their minds. They made nets, hooks, clothing sewn with bone needles. They crafted lamps from hollowed stones filled with fat. A wick of moss curled inside. The flame flickered like thought. Small, steady, controlled. They built baskets to carry. slings to hold babies, footwear wrapped with fur and padded with grass. They shaped their world with their minds, not just reacting, but reshaping. And perhaps the most important gift of all, they learned to teach, not just by doing, but by explaining, by modeling, by storytelling. They taught not only how to survive, but why it mattered. They taught what came before, and they hinted at what might come next. No other species had done this so fully. No other brain had such range. Imagination gave them maps of places they had never seen. It gave them warning for dangers not yet arrived. It gave them empathy, the ability to know the mind of another, to feel what someone else might feel, to plan for others, to grieve them, to forgive them. It gave them futures. The mind of Homo sapiens became their greatest tool, more powerful than flint, more enduring than bone. It could store generations of knowledge. It could invent gods, solve problems, create beauty. It could change the world. And it did. Survival was never just about endurance. Not for Homo sapiens. It was not enough to eat, to stay warm, to find shelter. They needed more. They needed meaning. They needed beauty, even in the harshest corners of the world. And so, they made it. From stone, from bone, from flame and memory and imagination. They didn't just survive the world. They reshaped it. The first signs are small. A carved bead made of ivory, its surface smoothed by careful fingers. It dangles from a woven cord around a child's neck. A gift, perhaps. A token of protection. A symbol of belonging. Nearby, an older woman kneels by a fire. She etches tiny lines into a piece of antler. Not to cut, not to hunt, but to decorate. The pattern flows like river currents, each line deliberate, a quiet act of devotion. This is survival through expression, through art, through culture, in a world that demanded so much. Hunting, fleeing, tracking, healing. Homo sapiens still made time to shape, to sing, to paint. It wasn't luxury. It was essential. It was the soul, reaching outward. The caves tell us this. Deep in the heart of the earth, far from the cold wind and the noise of predators, they painted. They lit fat-burning lamps, the flames flickering against limestone walls. The air was warm, close. It smelled of smoke, of damp rock, of crushed minerals mixed with spit. And on those walls, they left visions. Mammoths, bison, horses running with manes outstretched. Some red, some black, some yellow with iron dust. Some with outlines traced again and again. As if the image had to live. As if to draw it was to summon it. In the silence of the cave, a girl presses her hand against the wall. Her mother dusts red ochre across the back of it. Then, the hand lifts, and a silhouette remains. A moment frozen. A gesture across time. We can still see it. Her hand, pressed to stone 30,000 years ago. That simple, sacred print. A reminder. I was here. I mattered. But art was not only for walls. It moved with them, hung around their necks, was tucked into burial cloths. It traveled, carried across mountains, across deserts, across memory. They carved figurines from bone, women with wide hips and rounded bellies, symbols of fertility, or ancestors, or gods. We do not know, but we know they were important. They were touched, passed, kept close. The smooth wear on their surface tells us. These were not tossed aside. These were loved. They made music. Real music. Bone flutes. Drums of stretched hide. Sticks carved with grooves to rasp against stone. They hummed. They sang. They clapped hands and stomped feet in time. Music to celebrate. Music to mourn. Music to remember. And when words failed, music remained. The rhythm of the body, the breath, the heart, all part of the same dance. Even their tools became art. Not only practical, but beautiful. A spear point etched with lines. A scraper polished until it gleamed. A bowl rimmed with carved spirals. Not for show, but for meaning. Because to craft something well was to respect it, to honor it. Even fire, the most practical of all tools, became ritual. The way it was lit, the stones it was built upon, the direction of the flame. It crackled with memory, hissed with story, danced with dreams. Clothing, too, told stories. They stitched furs with sinew, dyed hides with plant pigments, sewed shells into collars, and painted faces for ceremonies. These were not just garments. They were language, an identity worn against the cold. Colors and patterns marked tribes. Ritual paint showed roles. A hunter, a healer, a mother. Even children had marks drawn on their cheeks. For rites of passage, for protection, for celebration. And they made places sacred. Not just shelters, but sites. A certain bend in the river. A cluster of stones where the sun hit just right. A circle of mammoth bones. Set not for defense, but for ceremony. They returned to these places, over and over, left offerings, sang songs, told stories. These were early temples, not built to impress, but to remember, to anchor the soul, to the turning of the world. Burial was an art in itself. Bodies curled gently, often in fetal positions, as if returning to the earthwomb. Graves lined with red ochre, shells and beads tucked beside the dead, tools placed in hand. Sometimes, flowers, a soft goodbye, a hope that life did not end, but shifted. These weren't just practical farewells. They were statements, declarations of value, of grief, of love. The grave was a canvas, and the body, a memory made visible. Through all of this, Homo sapiens were not just surviving. They were becoming something more. They were transforming necessity into beauty, turning pain into poetry, turning fear into music. They were mapping the emotional world. With every artifact, every symbol, every gesture, and this ability to express, to shape culture, to externalize the mind, was their greatest strength. The cold didn't stop them. The hunger didn't stop them. They painted when there was nothing to eat. They carved when the wind howled like wolves. They sang while burying their children. They danced while preparing for the hunt. Because meaning is what gave survival its purpose. Without it, what was the point of enduring? This was the art of survival. Not the struggle to exist, but the triumph of being human. To feel, to reflect, to create. Even when the world said, survive and nothing more, they said, no, we will live, and we will remember. They did not vanish in an instant. There was no single battle, no final breath echoing through the valleys, no moment when the last Neanderthal looked to the sky and knew the end had come. Instead, it was quiet, gradual, a soft erasure, a thinning of footprints in the snow, a silence where once there were fires, a cave left empty, its walls still warm with memory. For thousands of years, Homo sapiens had shared the world with others. Neanderthals, Denisovans, tiny island dwellers like Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis. They had all walked upright, all shaped tools, all made fire. Some had spoken, some had buried their dead. They had survived ice and hunger, predators and storms. They had watched the same stars, and dreamed their own dreams. And then, one by one, they were gone. We do not know all the reasons, but we can feel the shape of their absence. Like a ghost in the corner of the story, like a song that once echoed, but now only hums faintly in our blood. The world had changed, and they had not changed fast enough. The climate shifted, colder, more volatile. Glacier surged, swallowing valleys. Seasons shortened, resources scattered. Neanderthals, for all their strength and cold hardiness, were tied to specific habitats. They knew their regions well. But when the animals moved, when the forests thinned, they struggled to follow. Homo sapiens were different, more adaptable, more mobile. They could live in tents or caves. They could hunt a wider range of prey. They could eat roots, berries, fish, meat. They could imagine new solutions, craft better tools, coordinate in larger groups, pass down what worked. They were flexible. Neanderthals were fixed. It wasn't just the cold. It was the competition. In more and more regions, the two species overlapped, not always in conflict, sometimes in peace, but always side by side. And in that closeness, one species flourished, the other faded, not because it was weaker, but because it was outnumbered. A Neanderthal mother watches the trees. She hears voices, not her kin, them. They pass through like wind, lighter, faster, with tools made of bone, carrying baskets, speaking strange words in soft tones. She draws her child closer, lights a fire, keeps quiet. Their groups were smaller, their birth rates lower. In times of stress, every life mattered more. Every death struck harder. Disease may have spread, perhaps from contact. A virus or parasite, harmless to one species, deadly to another. Invisible forces, moving through shared water, shared soil, shared firelight. But there was something deeper still, something not of bone or breath, but of mind. Homo sapiens carried memory like fire. They shared stories across generations. They taught not just what to do, but why to do it. They built culture that extended beyond the individual. That meant a child could grow with the wisdom of many lifetimes. That mistakes didn't need to be repeated. That success could spread. They survived. Together. Meanwhile, the others dwindled. A few families left in a cold valley. A lone group in a mountain cave. Their tools unchanged. Their songs growing quieter. And over time, no more footprints. No more fires. Only echoes. In one cave in Spain, a Neanderthal handprint still clings to the wall. A silhouette of life. Pressed in red ochre. Its fingers spread. Its presence defiant. That hand has no body now, but it speaks. It says, "We were here. We mattered. We were human, too." In Siberia, only a single Denisovan tooth remains. A fragment of a finger bone. A whisper of a girl. Lost to time. Yet her DNA lives on. In the lungs of Tibetan children. In the skin of islanders. In bloodlines that reach across oceans. She is not forgotten. Not completely. And in Indonesia, the Homo floresiensis vanished, leaving behind bones, tools, legends. Locals still speak of little people in the hills, of shadows in the trees, of watchers at night. Maybe stories are the longest memory of all. For Homo sapiens, the others became part of us. Literally, we carry fragments of them. Genes for immunity, for strength, for adaptation. Their songs may live in our melodies. Their silence, in our quiet moments. Their rituals, buried deep in our ceremonies. Their fears, in our myths. They didn't disappear entirely. They were absorbed, merged, remembered. But still, there was loss. A richness of diversity. A chorus of voices. Gone. What would the world be if they had remained? If Neanderthals had built cities? If Denisovans had carved empires into stone? We will never know. And so we grieve them. Even now, thousands of years later, we feel that grief. The ache of vanished cousins. The loneliness of being the last. We survived. But we did not win. There was no triumph. Only continuation. We endured. Because we adapted. Because we dreamed. Because we remembered. But survival is not victory. It is responsibility. We walk forward carrying them. Their memory. Their legacy. Their stories told through us. We look at the stars and wonder who else once did the same. We see handprints on cave walls and feel them press against our own. Not as ghosts, but as family. They had walked for generations, across deserts and forests, through high mountains and along endless coastlines. They had followed the rains and the animals and the slow, steady pull of something unknown. By now, they had reached the edges of Asia, where the wind howled across frozen plains, and the sun hung low in the sky like a pale ghost. And still, they moved forward. Ahead of them lay a bridge, not of stone or rope or wood, but of ice, of land exposed by a world locked in cold. It was not a bridge they could see all at once. It stretched slowly, subtly, across the water, connecting two worlds, Asia and the Americas. We call it Beringia now, a land bridge that once linked Siberia to Alaska, a vast corridor of tundra and grass, treeless, windswept, cold, but not impossible. And sometime, maybe 20,000 years ago, maybe earlier, Homo sapiens crossed it. They would not have known what it meant. That they were stepping into a land no human had ever touched. That they were writing a new chapter in the story of the species. They only knew what was in front of them. Open space. Fresh hunting grounds. A new path through the snow. The journey was long. Not a single migration, but many waves of families, bands of wanderers, tribes tracing the footprints of those who came before. The land beneath their feet was hard, the frost clinging to their clothing, their breath freezing in the air as they walked. Snowflakes drifted sideways in the wind. Herds of mammoth moved like mountains across the horizon, their bellows low and thunderous. The sky stretched wide above them, gray by day, star-scattered by night. The stars became maps, the wind, a teacher, the silence, a companion. They hunted with purpose, spears tipped with stone points, atlatls, throwing tools that gave their weapons more reach, more force. They tracked by signs, scat, broken branches, distant sounds, a flicker in the trees, a smear of blood in the snow. Every sense was alert. The scent of musk in the air, the feel of shifting earth underfoot, the faint tremble of distant hoofbeats through the soles of their feet. This was a new world, and it was filled with giants. They had never seen animals like this. Mastodons, short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, ground sloths larger than oxen, beavers the size of wolves, herds of caribou, bison with massive horns. The land itself seemed scaled to a different measure. It smelled of pine and ice, of crushed sage and wet fur. Its air felt heavier, colder, but cleaner, alive with potential. And they thrived in it. They made new tools to suit this world. Clovis points, sharp, fluted blades perfect for piercing thick hide. Scrapers shaped from obsidian and chert. Snares of twisted plant fiber. Fishing lines made from sinew. Clothing layered in furs and leathers. They shaped their shelters from bones and hides. Semi-subterranean, to trap heat. Fire at the center. Smoke curling up through narrow vents. Inside, it smelled of cooked meat, animal fat. Dried herbs hung in bundles. A child drew in the dirt with a stick. A mother stitched a pouch from tanned skin. A man carved a flute from bird bone. The rhythm of survival continued. Now, in a new key, they moved steadily south, over centuries, following herds, seeking shelter, exploring, past glacier that towered like cliffs, across frozen rivers that glittered like glass, into valleys rich with life, and farther still into warmer lands. Each generation carried stories of the land behind, of the ancestors, of the stars. The constellations changed. New shapes appeared in the sky, and still they looked upward. They saw meaning in the heavens, and memory in the ground. By 13,000 years ago, they had reached far into North America, then into Central America, and finally into South America. From the Arctic to the Andes, from tundra to rainforest, from cave to city, they spread. They found the Amazon, a green world of noise and shadow, where everything dripped with moisture, and the air smelled of rot and bloom. They learned to build canoes from hollowed logs, to catch fish with woven traps, to climb trees like monkeys. They found the highlands of Peru, where the mountains tore the sky, and the air turned thin and bright. They found the pampas, wide grasslands where they could run for days, without seeing the same tree twice. Everywhere they went, they made it home. They built with what they found: wood, stone, fiber, bone. In the deserts, they made shelters of earth and hide. In the mountains, they stacked stones into walls. In the forests, they tied vines and bent trees into frame and roof. They painted again, on rocks and canyon walls. Deer, jaguar, birds with wings spread wide. They marked the turning of the sun, the migration of birds, the shape of the seasons. They did not come to conquer. They came to belong. They brought culture, language, ceremony. They sang to rivers. They danced before the hunt. They left offerings of fruit and feathers where trees split the sky. They watched the moon and saw stories. They gave names to each mountain, each storm. The new world did not change them. It revealed them. And yet, the giants began to disappear. Not all at once, but quickly, in terms of time. The mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-toothed cats, gone. Some say it was overhunting. Others, a warming climate. Perhaps both, or something else. But as the great beasts vanished, humans adapted again. They turned to smaller prey, to agriculture, to community, from survival to civilization. In time, they built cities, temples, fields of maize and squash, networks of roads and trade. They wove cotton, carved jade, measured stars. They became Maya, Olmec, Inca. They became nations. They became legacy. But before they were anything else, they were wanderers. They were families crossing frozen earth. They were children born beneath unfamiliar stars. They were firelight in a land that had never known it. They were the first to step where no one had, and they were changed by it. Into the new world. Homo sapiens carried everything they had learned. From Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from memory. They carried tools and stories, blood and language, fear and wonder, and most of all, they carried the future. The ice began to retreat, not all at once, but slowly, quietly. Glacier pulled back like a tide in slow motion. The ground, once frozen and lifeless, softened. Rivers flowed faster. Trees crept northward. Grasses grew thick in places where snow once ruled. The Great Ice Age was ending, and the world was waking. So too were the people. Homo sapiens had survived the long cold. They had crossed continents, faced beasts with ivory tusks and claws curved like knives. They had lived in caves, in tents, in shelters of bone and bark. They had carved tools, painted stories, whispered songs to the fire. And now, they began to stay. Not just for a season, not just for the hunt, but to settle. At first, it was gradual. A return to familiar grounds. A favorite valley. A fertile hilltop. A bend in the river where the fish always gathered. They stayed for a moon cycle. Then two. Then through the winter. Then, year after year. Roots took hold, not just in soil, but in memory, in rhythm, in culture. They watched the land closely. They noticed which plants returned, when birds arrived, where the sun set at solstice. They began to mark time, not just by hunger or weather, but by pattern. The slow wheel of seasons turned, and they learned to follow it, to plant, to harvest, to wait. Farming began, not all at once, not everywhere, but in places where wild grains grew thick, in the Fertile Crescent, along the Nile, in the highlands of Peru, and the riverbanks of China. People began to gather seeds, to save them, to scatter them, to shape the earth. Hands that once threw spears, now pressed seeds into soil. They watered, they weeded, they watched, and food grew. The smell of earth became familiar, the texture of loam between fingers, the crackle of dry husks in the sun, the crunch of roasted barley, the bitter green of first shoots. They domesticated wheat, millet, barley, rice, maize, and beans. They learned what fed the body best, what cured, what poisoned, what could grow side by side. They carved terraces into hills, irrigated with canals, built granaries of stone and clay. The world became a garden, and they, its keepers. With food came stability, and with stability came culture. Families grew, generations rooted, villages formed, clusters of homes made from mud brick, with roofs of reeds and thatch. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. The scent of stew mingled with wood smoke. Children chased goats through dusty paths. Elders sat on woven mats, telling stories, spinning fiber, shaping tools from flint and obsidian. Specialization emerged. Some gathered, some hunted, some shaped pottery. Cool clay spun and smoothed, fired with ashen flame. The pots told stories, geometric patterns, animals, spirals echoing rivers and stars. Others worked in bone or shell, carving needles, ornaments, fish hooks. Some tanned hides, some wove cloth, some watched the skies. A new kind of knowledge was taking shape, not passed down through survival alone, but through craft, through purpose. Trade blossomed, not just of goods, but of ideas. From one valley to the next, people shared more than just obsidian blades or salt or beads. They shared songs, rituals, names for stars, methods for building, ways to heal, along rivers and coastlines, on paths worn by generations of feet. The human web stretched wide. Villages became towns, towns became centers, and culture became civilization. They built walls, not just for protection, but to mark boundaries, to say, "This is ours. We belong here." They raised stones in circles, stacked temples of mud brick, aligned doorways with solstices, carved pillars with images of gods, of animals, of ancestors. They buried the dead beneath their floors, lit lamps at dusk, made offerings of grain and milk. They painted walls with ochre and lime, planted gardens beside graves. The sacred and the everyday were woven together, not separate, but seamless. Religion bloomed, Not just belief, but ritual. A way to explain the wind, the birth of the moon, the crack of thunder, the silence after death. They worshipped rivers, mountains, sun and moon and stars, animals that had fed them, spirits they felt but could not name. They wore masks in ceremony, danced in circles until their feet ached, chanted beneath open skies. Their bodies moved with intention, telling stories in gesture and breath. With belief came identity. With identity came legacy. They began to write. Not with letters yet, but with marks. Tally marks on bones. Symbols scratched into pots. Clay tablets pressed with reeds. Words were still far away, but language was reaching outward. The mind spilled into stone, the voice into fire. They began to build monuments. In Turkey, at a site called Göbekli Tepe, giant stone pillars were arranged in rings, carved with animals, faces, symbols. It was built before farming, before towns, a temple older than cities, proof that culture was not born of agriculture, but that the need to gather, to worship, to create, came first. They didn't wait for convenience to build meaning. They built meaning because it was needed. Art grew bolder, more abstract, more personal. Figures of gods with wide eyes, lines to mark the passing of moons, birds, hands, eyes. The human face began to appear, etched into amulets, painted on walls, not just as a symbol, but as self. They were not just humans now. They were people, with names, with families, with dreams made visible. Music evolved. Flutes became tuned. Drums echoed across plazas. Stringed instruments were born from gut and wood. Voices sang in harmony, call and response. Lullabies for infants, chants for harvest, songs to mark death and marriage and the return of the rains. Their world had rhythm, not imposed from above, but beating within. And in the stillness of evening, when the work was done, they sat together, by the fire, beneath the stars, with food, with drink, with memory, and they told stories of the first hunters, of gods who shaped mountains, of children lost and found, of love and grief and laughter. They passed the stories down, mouth to mouth, mind to mind, not for survival, but for joy, for truth, for connection. This was the rise of culture, not sudden, not uniform, but inevitable, because the same spark that once lit a fire in a cave now lit cities, because the same hand that once carved a mammoth on a stone wall now built temples and wrote hymns, because Homo Sapiens were never meant just to survive. They were meant to mean something, to each other, to the world, to time itself. We are not alone, not entirely, though the others are gone. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the tiny people of the islands, those who never left Africa's forests, they are still with us, in our blood, in our bones, in the shape of a brow, the twist of a muscle fiber, the strength of an immune cell. We carry their legacy, not just in science, but in spirit. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were many. different species, different paths, sharing the earth, sometimes together, sometimes apart, each with their own songs, their own ways of walking, of watching the stars, of speaking to the wind. They were not us, but they were human. And then, they were gone, and we remained. The story of Homo sapiens is often told as a victory, a triumph of intelligence, of adaptability, of language and art and fire. And that is true. We did survive. We did thrive. We shaped the earth, wrote our names across oceans, sent our voices to the stars. But survival is not conquest. It is a kind of mourning. Imagine the last Neanderthal, not as a brute, but as a parent, as a child, as someone who watched the sun rise, and warmed their hands by a fire, and dreamed of what tomorrow might bring. Imagine her in the cave, painting animals she would never hunt again, singing a lullaby to a child, whose bones would one day vanish into dust. The wind howls through the empty entrance. The embers burn low. She closes her eyes. Or picture a Denisovan boy, in a high, cold forest, his hands wrapped in furs, his breath clouding in the air as he watches the snow fall. He has never seen the sea. He does not know the world is changing. He only knows the smell of pine, the taste of roasted roots, the sound of his mother's voice in the dark. And then, his story ends. Not in tragedy, not in fire, just in silence. We are the descendants of survival, but also of loss. For every ancestor who lived, thousands more were lost. For every culture we remember, others vanished without a trace. For every footprint we find, 1,000 more were washed away by time. And yet, some things remain. In our DNA, Neanderthal genes help us fight infection. Denisovan traits help us breathe at high altitudes. We are mosaics, not pure, but shared, blended. We are not the end of the story. We are what remains. And in our myths, the past lingers. Legends of wild men in the woods, of shadowy creatures who lived before us, of beings part human, part other. They appear in cave paintings, in folk tales, in forgotten songs. Perhaps these are memories, not of monsters, but of cousins. Cousins who once walked beside us, laughed beside us, faded beside us. They shaped the world we inherited. They helped tame fire, chase game, trace rivers, observe stars. They were part of the human experiment, one we all continue. When we paint, when we sing, when we grieve, we carry them forward. Every act of beauty, every ritual of mourning, every time we reach toward something greater, we echo what they once did. We are the last human species, but we are never truly alone. We hear them in our stories. We feel them in our instincts. We see them in our children's faces. And when we press our hands against cave walls, real or imagined, we leave our own prints beside theirs. So, why did we survive? Because we were adaptable. Because we cooperated in larger groups. Because we imagined. Because we remembered. Because we made meaning from suffering. Because we carried memory like fire. Because we changed, again and again, without losing ourselves. Because when the cold came, we leaned closer. When the darkness grew, we made light. When we were afraid, we told stories. And through those stories, we became. Today, we live in cities built from stone and steel. We send messages across oceans. We decode the spiral of life. We build machines that learn. We plan to touch other planets. But in the stillness, we are still the same. We gather around glow and warmth. We tell stories in the dark. We seek to understand who we are by remembering where we came from. And we look at the stars, still wondering. Somewhere in the quiet corners of the earth, a handprint remains, faded, pressed into rock, surrounded by the painted shapes of mammoths, of lions, of men dancing with arms outstretched. It is not a monument. It is not a warning. It is a whisper, a trace of life, a gesture that says, I was here. I mattered. I lived. We hear you. We remember. And as long as we endure, so will you. Thank you for joining me on this long, quiet walk through deep time. If you found this journey meaningful, if you felt a connection to our shared past, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Stories not just of survival, but of wonder, of memory, and of what it truly means to be human. Now rest easy. You are part of something ancient, and you are not alone. Good night.